Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the fourth in our series of interviews with Hymn Society leaders in preparation for the celebration of our 100th anniversary during the coming year of 2022. My name is Mike McMahon. I'm Executive Director of the Hymn Society in the United States and Canada, and it's my pleasure today to welcome the Reverend John Ambrose, who is a minister of the United Church of Canada, has served as pastor to congregations in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Ontario. He was the founding director of the Office of Worship for the United Church of Canada, and was also the editor of their hymnal, Voices United, which was published in 1996 and just celebrated its 25th anniversary. But as many of you watching this interview already know, John's curriculum vitae is just a taste of who he is and the kinds of things that he's done and contributed to all of us. So I'm looking forward to this opportunity to kind of let him talk about himself and the kinds of things he's been involved in. And so here we go. John, welcome.
Thank you, and grand to be here.
It's great to be here. I wanted to start off by asking about your early life and how you got into ministry and music and pastoring and worship. What kind of influences were there in your life at that time?
Well, it started with the usual pressure from parents to expose their child to music. Both my older sister and I were starting piano lessons. She discontinued. I wouldn't say I was forced to go on, but I was pressured, to go on. And had a wonderful piano teacher. This was about 7 years old, and she does an ear test with all of her pupils. And so she asked me to sing to check pitch and so on. And so she then phoned my parents to say, had you ever thought of putting John into a children's choir in the church? Well, we're very active in the church, but there was no children's choir there. So she said, well, my cousin, who is a music director at the nearby Anglican church, he might be able to join that choir. So at about the age of 7.5, and I brought a few props along here. This was my first career as a church musician. And it was under the Royal School of Church Music. So you can see the medallions that we wear.
Which one are you?
I am the one over here.
I was going to guess that, actually.
Yeah, yes. This is the cherubic one. This was the really fine singer. I was just a good support group at that point. And, but I was there for 5 years until my voice changed. And at that point, my parents drew me back into the United Church to join the senior choir. Just a slight aside, we're in the Christmas season, and we did the carols by candlelight, starting off Once in Royal David City with that solo voice of a child. And through the almost 6 years, I had never been able to do that. And that was my year to do it. And my voice changed in the summer. And I've felt that loss for a long time.
That's something you can never get back, right?
Yeah.
Wow. So I think that it's interesting to hear about your formation as a musician, and I assume you continued with music. Yes.
Yes, I did sing in the adult choir at my church in Ottawa, and the music director was a high school superintendent and also very interested in music, and so he wondered. Since I'd had piano lessons, if I might be interested in taking organ lessons, and it never crossed my mind. But anyway, he was offering them for nothing, and I started into the organ only to realize that organists are hard to come by with some of the smaller churches. And loved playing the organ, but I also appreciated some revenue finally coming in for a 15-year-old there. And then I began working with choirs in high school. I was president of the organization, again in university, working and helping the director develop the choir, and especially touch into the male element in schools, which they don't gravitate to choirs unless there's some kind of a connection that they could be made. But those choirs, both in the church and in the high school and university community, were really shaping my interest and my comfort level with working with choirs as well as singing in them.
So, and how then did you come to become a pastor?
That was really a plan of mine from mid-high school. During my teen years, I became involved with an organization of youth parliaments, Ontario Older Boys Parliament, youth parliaments. And because I was sort of encouraged to go representing an Ottawa constituency, it was based on sort of our provincial ridings and so on. And living in Ottawa, watching politics all the time, that captured my interest. And so in that experience with the Boys Parliament, which was really faith-based, stirrings for interest in ministry started to develop, and they never abated, strangely enough. It just was a steady, I knew where I was wanting to go. I never regretted going there.
Now, one of the things you told me when we were talking a couple of weeks ago was, as a pastor, you made use of your musical ability, and I was wondering if you could share that with everybody.
I've forgotten what I've told you, but anyway, because I was in Saskatchewan and there were very, very small churches in rural areas, often they couldn't find a musician. So I would sit down and play the hymns at the piano or a little spinet organ, and then go to the pulpit again, and back down for the, to the piano or spinet organ. And that happened for about 4 years doing that. And slowly we were able to do some recruiting to relieve me of, because I was doing 4 services every Sunday. And you just come home and collapse at the end. But it also allowed me to draw some singers together so that we formed little choirs as this was emerging too.
And as a pastor, you say something about how you encouraged congregational singing and how you developed that in your own congregations?
Yeah, it was at a point in which new music was coming mostly out of England, actually, and there were often new tunes to familiar texts. And because of the background, I decided to take, not all the congregations would welcome it, but 3 of the 4 did. I would do a little bit of teaching, just showing them some lines of music so that they would feel comfortable, often maybe just in the chorus. And I began to realize that when you can bring the congregation in with some strength in terms of participation through song, you really contribute to the energy, to the vitality of the service. And that stayed with me on into Winnipeg and on into Toronto, to actually focus on brief periods of teaching, so that when you throw a new song, new hymn, first of all, you have the advantage of actually throwing a new song or hymn at them because you're going to help them along. And I always said, if the choir has to learn it, the congregation needs time to learn it as well.
Yeah. And you did some marathon things too.
Yes, in the latter part of my time in Mississauga as a minister, we moved into what was a multi-denominational setting, 4 churches under one roof in 4 different segments of the building, and we outgrew that. And we knew we had to look at the development of a new facility. So that meant we didn't have much money, but we had to find some sources. So I then began to do hymn marathons. And this is a picture of John doing a hymn marathon. People would bid so much per hymn. And sometimes 3 cents, 5 cents, 10 cents. Some were even foolish enough to do $1, which at that thing. But the first time I did it, I had much learning to do. I was exhausted, did about 300 and raised quite a few $1,000s. A couple of years later, I moved it up to 500 hymns, but I was learning some techniques now. And one was people want to come and sing along. So you have to set the times when they can actually come and sing with you, because it's slow going otherwise. I would have someone who had prepared the hymn, put it on the keyboard for me because I was not stopping. And there was somebody in the background recording each one. Then moved it up to 700, and then finally 1,000. And with the 1,000, I spent from 6 to 9 in the morning speed playing the hymns, nobody around other than the recorder. So you would do 3 verses, holy, 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 la, da, 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 da. No stopping, you plow through the next one, the next one, the next one, so on. So you can get, 150 or 200 under your belt very quickly. And then later in the day, the latter part, we took another couple of hours, nobody around for me to do some speed playing. Now, maybe that's more than you want to know, but that was kind of the way we did it.
No, that's fascinating. I'm sure a lot of us are looking for fundraising techniques. That sounds like a good. How much were you able to raise through marathons?
I think probably in the range of overall between $35,000 and $40,000, because people were they were ready to plunge in. If any musicians are listening and want some information, I actually came across, because we're moving and I'm going through stuff, I came across a list of about 10 suggestions to church musicians who might want to do hymn marathons, some tips on how to go about it.
Sounds like fun.
It was fun. You can hardly move for about 2 days after, but
well, just as with a running marathon, right?
Exactly.
So after you served as pastor for several congregations, you took a position with the United Church of Canada national position. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was working at a church in East Toronto at the time. I'd only been there 3 years, and it was a wonderful congregation. And Catherine and I were able to bring our music. We had a wonderful music director, so we were able to do not only just the church music, but community shows and so on and so forth. And then out of the blue, 2 senior staff members appeared at service one Sunday and asked to talk with me afterwards, and asked if because the church was restructuring its divisions, they were wanting to start an office of worship and music. And I thought about it, but I declined. I did feel it was not fair to me to lead these people so early into their investment, moving me from Western Canada and so on. And I thought it was over, but they came back the next year to say, John, is there any possibility you might reconsider? So in talking with the church officials, they affirmed it. And I have to say, for me, it was a rich, rich experience because I do, I kind of like to start from scratch and see how to build, to learn the building process. And one of the things I learned quickly was if the office is going to have any place in the life of the church, you have to be out there. So I brought one more picture of me in action leading workshops. I have no idea where, but one of about close to 100 workshops I did in the first year and a half. And the other little thing I did was to go into my own resources, worship resources for seasons and themes and so on, and put together a little packet called Getting It All Together. And the church approved the expenditure of having this printed and sent free to every congregation across the country. Now, the writer was, if you want this to continue, this is your opportunity to send me your materials and we will pull them together and then distribute them that way. And the first year or so, things came in just dribs and drabs, and I kept expanding it from various sources. Slowly, I was getting an avalanche. People became confident. I was getting an avalanche of really good materials. A few years later, when I had left the job, my the fellow who followed me changed it to a book called a quarterly journal called Gathering. And Gathering is still going now, some 35 years later, as a major sort of at-home, in-house resource fed by the people contributing all of their resources, across Canada. I never imagined it would last that long.
That's awesome. We learned in the course of our earlier conversation that we overlapped for 2 years in graduate school at Notre Dame, both of us looking to, build up our knowledge of worship and liturgy. And I wondered what that experience was like for you because you were already at the denominational office at that point. Is that right?
I was at the office, yes. And it became, even though I'd had, a significant course in worship, I just felt I needed something of considerably more depth and so on, and to look at all of the aspects theologically as well as liturgically. And I looked around, and when I saw what Notre Dame was offering and had wonderful Catholic friends, they said, there's the place to go. So it was a summer course, very intense summer course, as you know. And so I started in 77 and did 78 and 79. Then I had to stop because of family issues and then finish it up 2 years later. So we were overlapping, I guess, a bit, but I guess we didn't necessarily meet one another.
I finished in 78, so yes,
yeah.
we had some overlap.
Yeah, the course in Christian initiation was for me a life changer. I don't remember anything that so filled out the whole nature of baptism, why we do it, what is the grounding, what are the underpinnings, and what are the long range implications. And that, and also looking at we say communion in our church, but looking at the Mass. And as you know, the staff was very ecumenical. It wasn't, simply, from the Roman Catholic Church. There were Anglicans and others there. So it was rich. And that's where I first met Michael Jonkus. Michael, one hot evening, and I think I shared this with you, and you were there that night, I guess, eh?
I think so.
Yeah. For those who are listening, South Bend can be one of the hot spots in the USA in the summer, and leaving an air-conditioned room to go and sit in the Sacred Heart Chapel, which is just packed with heat. I debated whether I would go, and I thought, don't be such a wimp, go on over. And a young chap with his guitar was introduced and wanted to share with us a song that he had written, I guess, for the funeral of a priest friend. And he sang On Eagle's Wings. And every time I hear that, excuse me, I get emotional because it was such a beautiful thing. And Michael's voice and his guitar playing and the words just were captivating. The next morning, I caught Michael just before one of the classes we were going into and said, is it possible to get a copy of that? And he said, well, I only have the guitar chords. I have the melody line and guitar chords and the words, but I don't have the rest of it. And I said, well, is there a possibility that I could get a copy? I said, I'm involved in publishing music, for the United Church and so on. And I think my wife could probably flesh that out with an accompaniment, so on. So I brought it home and that would be at the end of August, and Catherine my wife worked out an accompaniment, and we published it in Getting It All Together. Now, why I'm telling you that is I think it was in the United Church that this was first circulated across Canada with that version. Once the copyright, of course, came into place and so on, that was the end of the story. But we love to think that, Michael, your composition had its first landing in the United Church.
And it's pretty astounding, when they do surveys of most beloved hymns in the English language, it always, that On Eagle's Wings always makes it in the top 10, always.
And it's almost universal.
And throughout the English-speaking world, and we can point to a time when we heard it, for the first time, and in our lifetime. That's pretty astounding.
It is, yeah.
One of the things that for me was important about the Notre Dame experience was, as you sort of alluded to, the ecumenical nature of not only the faculty but even the student body. I mean, so even though it was predominantly Catholic, the variety of traditions represented there was really enriching, and it sort of opened me to the ecumenical church in ways that I had never experienced before.
No, that was really, I've had a lot of, kind of glancing ecumenical experience, but that one was in depth, and I never felt at sea. I never felt alone. Like the body of people who were there just, gathered around, and it was, it remains still a highlight probably in my educational experiences.
Yeah, same. So not at some point when you were at the worship office, then you started on the project, the hymnal project. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you worked with that.
Well, there was a little span. I did the 6 years as the officer for worship and music, and then left that job to go to Mississauga to really start a new congregation there. There was about 35 families looking for a minister, and I thought I'd like to see what it is to work with a group right from scratch. And so I went there, I guess, in 1979, and was there for 12 years till 1991. Math has never been my strength. And I was at the national office at a meeting, and simply coming down some stairs to go home when I met the director of the particular division that was going to do the hymn book. They were sponsoring that. And he simply asked me if I would help them to go through the resumes and maybe identify, because he knew with my previous experience, most of the key musicians across the country. And so I said, sure, when are you meeting? And he said, well, tomorrow morning, actually, at 9 o'clock. And I said, oh my Lord, there were something like 17 or 18 resumes to go through. So I got home that night about 10 o'clock and started until 3 in the morning and worked at going through the resumes, and then met with him the next day. And we established 3 top people. They were really 3 top people. And so then the next question was, would you mind sitting in on the interviews next week? Okay, I'll sit in on the interviews. And now there were, I'm sorry, we had about 7, I guess, at that point, 7 possibilities. And then the next week we narrowed it down to the 3 and left it there. And they were in a first, second, and third choice. Anyway, went home. This was the Monday before Palm Sunday, Holy Week, and so on. On Friday of that week, I get a phone call to say, the person we have chosen has decided to decline for personal reasons and so on. I said, oh, that's fine. So shall we go to number 2 and so on and so forth? They said, actually, we've had a meeting this week and we've decided that we think you should take the job. Well, I hadn't applied. I'd not taken any interest in terms of the job. So after a week and a half of struggle, I finally conceded that I would take the role on. And it was awkward because we had just opened the new building. We had, a huge influx of new people, and to walk away from the congregation at that point was probably one of the most painful things I had to do in relation to the other. But I have to say, without realizing it, the church gifted me with an opportunity that would never have happened in my lifetime, had that not come along. I had nothing to go on, no job description, no materials. So I started with Sam Young and then Mary Jo, who was the Presbyterian, and just several to give me a start. Where do you land in? And then 2 days later after starting, my church was where the committee was to meet for the first time, and I had to host them there. And together we hadn't a clue what we were actually doing, but we were keen, to give it a start. So it's a long way of saying Voices United was nowhere on my radar when suddenly it became the job that the church wanted me to do.
And how long did that process take?
That was a 5-year process. It started in 91 and it ended in 96. The church had already done a massive checking of what hymns were still in active use on Sundays. It was a major survey. And that survey became a blessing to the committee as it started its work, because number one, we knew what hymns from the older hymn book were no longer in use or never got any use. We learned what ones we had been cut out before, that the people went back to the earlier hymn book and were still using them. And so we were able to say, we're restoring these hymns because they're still in active use. We are letting others go, including Onward Christian Soldiers. That caused a fury across the country. It was headlines on major newspapers. One morning, I got a call from the receptionist at the national office to say, there's a gentleman outside picketing. And so I went down to talk with him, and he had a big, big sign saying, "Leave our hymns alone." He was a veteran, and we had a good conversation. I tried to explain to him. He was not able to hear it, but he was actually very, very kind. But the furor across the country, it came from every direction about taking this hymn, which had such a place in the life of the church for generations, and we learned it was not being sung except maybe at some funerals and so on. We did recover, probably lost a few supporters along the way, but we did recover.
Wow, was that the most traumatic experience you had in that process?
It was, because within 2 days, like, if you know Canada, the CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Company, is, it carries everything. So I was interviewed twice the next day around the reasons for it, and the reporters would come in, why are you taking this away? Why are you destroying this love hymn, et cetera, et cetera? But when we were able to kind of look at the survey and the context and what the church was saying to us, it so quickly softened, the attitudes. Now, that didn't stop the letters. Probably the most letters we received were around eliminating onward Christian soldiers.
It's interesting. As I look down the list of people who are watching right now, I noticed several who have either been members of hymnal committees or who have been the project directors for hymnal projects. And I know they are relating big time to the kinds of things that you're talking about right now. I'd like to spend the last part of our time together talking about the Hymn Society. And I just want to say to all of you who are watching that if you'd like to ask any questions or make any comments that you'd like us to talk about, please put them in the question and answer feature or in the comment feature, and we'll try to deal with those before we break up today. But so John, you became president of the Hymn Society in the year 2004, I believe. Is that right?
I think it was 2012. I came on.
Oh, you're right. You're right. 12. Yeah.
12.
Right.
Yeah. I really didn't know the Hymn Society except by name. And it was Fred Graham, my dear colleague, Fred Graham, who was with me through all of that work on the hymn book, who said, "John, you really should try to connect, with the Hymn Society." And in 1993, it was scheduled to meet in Toronto. And so Fred was involved in the planning and pulled me in on that. And so I was more of an observer because I was drowning, with Voices United. But I'll never forget the opening night of the singing. It's, I think that's the one thing that captures newcomers, is the power of congregational song as expressed in the opening festival of the Hymn Society. And I was hooked immediately. Like, this was going to be my home extracurricular. I just loved what was happening. And the more I got acquainted with people and just attending and rubbing up against some of the hymn, those who were editors, I thought, this is something that more and more and more people should be aware of. And I took it upon myself to actually, whenever the Hymn Society was coming to Canada, to do an enormous amount of public relations to see if we could get attendance. And then I wasn't any spring chicken, by the time Mel Bringle phoned me and said, we think it's time now for another Canadian to be on the executive and as a sort of president in waiting. And I thought, I'm 74, Mel, have you called the right person? Like, why would you call me at this stage of my life? And she says, I'm not interested in your age, John. Just, I want to talk about, coming on the executive. And I think, as I said to you, I didn't quite say to her at that point. I said it later to the Hymn Society, but I said, I wanted to say, Mel, I don't even buy green bananas anymore. Now, why would you be asking me to take on this task and so on? But it was a thrill. It was a thrill. And one of the reasons she asked me was because of experience with fundraising. And the Hymn Society was coming to a point where they needed to be able to expand their vision. They had to get funds underneath it. But around the group, it was not one of the strengths there. Although John Thornburg, bless his heart, was there, and I think between the two of us and then eventually others caught the footing that we can certainly do fundraising. And, I simply said, you have to find a couple of very congenial people to do it, because fundraising is such a delicate issue, and the people who are leading it need to be winsome. And that's when we went into the first major fundraising project, which for me was the contribution I wanted to make, to the Hymn Society.
Yeah, and we certainly are the beneficiaries of all that effort. I mean, the financial situation of the Hymn Society is certainly way different today from what it was when you all started that process. And also it's enabled us to do the kind of expansion that you were speaking of. I wonder if you could reflect a little bit about change and how it's affected the Hymn Society and how you feel about your own role in bringing about that change.
Yeah, I must say I'm really, really very happy the way things have unfolded, with the Center for Congregational Song. And I still remember in Winnipeg when John Thornburg, there were three of us, from Dallas and a former president.
Jeffrey
Moore. Mm-hmm. We were closeted in a room trying to go through all sorts of suggestions, pages upon pages of suggestions. And as we sat there and talked about it, Jeffrey said, what we need is to identify some kind of center for congregational song. And suddenly the light went on in my head. Jeffrey, you've just told us what the new enterprise might look like. And that was sort of the turning point, Jeffrey coming up with that idea. And of course, John can capture these things, John Thornburg, and start to bring them to flesh. And Brian Hayne was on the executive at that point, and he was a great enthusiast because he could see a younger generation, which the Hymn Society badly needed. He could see a younger generation starting to identify if we did the right thing at that stage in terms of expanding the vision and basically the membership of the Hymn Society. I think on a personal level, watching the gifts coming from so many quarters has been, for me, exceptional. The diversity that marks it, and I'm so thrilled with the power and the presence of the Black community in the Hymn Society. It just, I can't find words to describe how much that means to me. And it has meant that the Hymn Society is really becoming international in ways beyond it imagines itself right now. So one of the things I've been sort of slowly pushing is to say, recognize that, begin to look at funding, which might help facilitate yet more international presence, involvement, contribution to the Hymn Society. The second thing is maybe with the richness of song that's coming in, learning to say, will that song be a song of the gathered congregation, or will it be the song of a listening congregation, not a singing congregation? And that has concerned me for a time, because there's a richness of talent, a richness of their gifts, but it seems to me that the power of Christian worship for us, largely in Protestant or non-Catholic denominations, is the power of the body singing. And if it moves too much away from that, then we have lost something of the dynamic and also the teaching aspect of our Christian faith, because the hymns embody the stories, the elements of our theological base. Not an easy answer to that one, because you don't want to discourage the musicians who are creating these things. But perhaps we're reaching a point where society doesn't sing a lot, that we may have to do some extra work towards strengthening congregational song. And I'm not talking about traditional hymns. I don't care what the flavor is. I'm really saying, help me participate.
You know, David Bjorlin just put a comment in the chat, a quote from Anne Sexton. They decided to become Protestants. Those are the people that sing when they aren't quite sure.
That's right.
I was wondering if we go back to the international thing for a moment. You were sort of directly involved in helping to foster that movement toward greater international participation. And I was wondering if you have any experiences that sort of stand out for you.
It's probably the major one was when John Faustini brought a large group from Brazil. I think the first group was about 7 or 8, and then it grew up to about 14. And these were excellent church musicians, very, very gifted. And but of course, they were attending, often not understanding, many of the presentations, but soaking up whatever they could and doing so in a very, very gracious and enthusiastic way. And I helped John at one point when he was bringing the larger group to raise some funds from Canadians just to support that. And that's what triggered my interest in sort of saying, let's build it. But we've had some wonderful folks coming from Japan, from Germany, from France, and finding the way not only to include them, but to be hospitable when they're there, so that they're not sort of just around the edges of the conference, but they're involved. That was what I was wanting to work with, and I guess trying to relate, as closely as I could to the individuals. And out of that, I've been doing English conversation with a group of Brazilian musicians.
So you're still doing that, right?
Still doing it. Yeah. One left, just one left.
That's really awesome. And John, I think everybody should know that in preparation for next summer's conference, you and I have been talking about trying to reach out even more to more international participants. We already have participants committed to coming from Japan and from Central Europe and from, of course, our friends at HSGBI, but also from Brazil. We've been talking to people in Argentina. We have people coming from Nigeria. So hopefully we'll be expanding, even beyond what we've been able to do so far as we celebrate our 100th anniversary. The other thing is, I'm sorry, go ahead and say that.
I just say I'm really looking forward to that opportunity to be a bit of a host for them. Yeah.
And then in 2023, we're going to be having our conference in Montreal. So it'll be another opportunity for the Canadians to shine and to get the word out around Canada as well. So we're looking forward to that. I don't see any questions. Not too many comments, except comments of appreciation for various points that you've raised and just for everything that you've contributed to congregational song and to the hymn society in general. Really very grateful for all of that. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with as we come to the end of our time, John?
Just to say thanks for the gift of the Hymn Society. It has been lifeblood for me in so many ways and continues to be that way. And I think being 85 now and still being healthy, I have to contribute it a lot to music, Hymn Society, and Saron Kosmeyer's name there, and a very dear friend and a gifted musician. And these are folks who have fed me, and I'm very, very grateful for the opportunities that the Hymn Society has given me and honoring me with a fellow. I couldn't believe it. I thought Fred, when he stood up to do that night, why don't you stop talking, Fred? On and on and on, and then the light went on. Surprise, surprise.
Well, certainly well deserved, and you've just done so much to help move us forward. Thank you, John, and thanks to all of you for watching today. Wish all of you a joyous Christmas, a happy New Year, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody in Washington in the summertime, but also back to some of these online sessions in the new year. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
In
Bye-bye.
whom I trust.